Yes, we can see. Welcome, Randy. So go ahead.
Okay, great. So I noticed my first mistake already. I had this for April 2022, and that's because I gave it at a presentation up in Connecticut. And then what I've done is after Sal and I were talking a little bit, I've expanded on it to go into a few more topics. But we're going to start out with a French culture quiz. So this is true or false. It's probably hard for everyone to answer. You don't need to speak up to do this on the mic, but I'll just give a second for you to think about this and just kind of answer in your own mind. French stores of all types must have public restrooms. I see Alice shaking her head no. False. Only enterprises that serve food are mandated to have public restrooms. Very important if you're going on a battlefield tour there. When entering a store, sorry, I'm just trying to move this. Let's see if I can move the bar. There we go. It's polite to say bonjour, monsieur, bonjour, madame, when entering a store, and au revoir when leaving a store of almost any size. And that is, oh, let me see. There we go, true. Number 3, if a French store employee doesn't acknowledge your presence when you enter his or her business, it's because he or she can tell you're a foreigner. Melanie's got a good smile on her face from this one. That is false. It's because they are giving their full attention to the customer that they are currently serving. And all of these things can, make someone that's not familiar with the culture a little angry, or upset or frustrated. So the best time to do any shopping is between 12 and 2 p.m. Because all the stores will be open to serve the French workers on their lunch break. Absolutely false. Almost all businesses not serving food will be closed then, and no amount of protest you can do or pleading will change that. I was lucky. I had a punctured tire, and I pulled into a little garage in Flayville, and by some miracle, the worker took pity on me, and it was like 5 minutes to 12, and he still fixed that before going on his break. Number 5, the last one, cars already in the roundabout have priority over cars entering the roundabout. And Americans, in my opinion, Americans are terrible at roundabouts, at least in New Jersey, especially, and to some degree in Virginia. And the answer to that is true. In France and in Europe, if you're already in the roundabout, you have priority. So why am I starting a battlefield tour presentation with a culture quiz? There's 3 things that you really need to do in order to have a good battlefield tour. One is an understanding of the events that occurred and their significance, some understanding of the culture and the language, and an understanding of the local region and geography. And I'll talk a little bit more about this as we go through each of these topics today. But really where you want to be is, and I think I can move my cursor here, you want to be really right in here where you've got a good knowledge or good understanding of all of that if you want to have a fun, enjoyable, rewarding experience. So there's really 3 ways that you can do this. You can join a tour, you can hire a set tour, you can hire a guide, or you can go it alone. Here are the pros of joining a tour. Certainly there's no work for you, that's the biggest thing. And you have to believe that the tour operator already has the knowledge of the local language, the culture, local area. What happens if, for instance, if one restaurant is closed that you were planning on going to, where can you go? Guides and historians probably have what I would call more insight, and we'll go through a few examples where you can see things that the normal person who isn't as well versed in military history would have. The cons, of course, is you have little or no input on the itinerary. The format can be inflexible. Will you enjoy the other participants, and you're paying for a certain amount of overhead? Hiring a guide, you get significantly more input into the subject and the sites that you're going to visit. You benefit from that guide's knowledge base regarding all of those things, the battlefield, the culture, the language, and the local region. And a good guide is going to help you tailor your tour to meet your interests. The negative is it is expensive. The going rate in the Meuse Argonne is about 300 euros or $350 a day. Perhaps you'll also have to pay some travel expenses. In Normandy, it's much more expensive than that. I think in Normandy, the rate is closer to 600 to 800 euros a day. Finally, going it alone, you get maximum flexibility to design your tour. You can match hotels, restaurants to your preferences, to your budget. You've got full control of the day. The negative is it takes much more work to plan. If you remember going back to those 3 circles, you've got to become at least some expert in all of those 3 areas, or at least proficient. And did you miss something because you didn't know it was there? So understanding events and their significance, here's one example. And this is a map from American armies and battlefields in Europe, the plan of flank attack of the First Army in October. So what was the significance between General Hunter Liggett's First Corps flank attack that was done by the 82nd and the 28th Infantry Divisions and the lost battalion of the 77th Division? If you look, you can see the flank attack coming in from here, going obliquely into the Argonne Forest, and you can see the lost battalion was situated down here. The answer is understanding how the German forces fought and what their strategies were. One of the things that the Germans always emphasized was in World War I was maintaining liaison with the flank units. With that attack coming into the Argonne Forest, it ran the risk of being able to surround the units, the German division that was in the Argonne Forest. And therefore, rather than risk being surrounded and captured totally, they withdrew. And you can see that best. Here's the line on the 8th of October, and here's the line on the 10th of October. So the Germans basically pulled back all the way out of the Argonne Forest, in part because of that flank attack that Hunter Liggett's First Corps did. If you're not well-versed in military history, you might not understand that significance. And so, said another way, it wasn't the strength of the 77th Division troops coming up here, fighting their way up to the lost battalion that allowed the lost battalion to be rescued. It was the German decision to pull back because their whole forces could have been encircled. So we're going to take a look at another example here. I didn't put any wording on this, but most of the time when we talk about Verdun, you're talking about the German offensive in 1916, not the French counterattack in August 1917, and not the French counterattack and the significance that it has for the Americans in September 1918. But if you look here from Avocourt to Forges along the Meuse River, that's the eastern half of the Meuse-Argonne offensive in 1918. So the significance of this is, and this picture is posted on Hill 304 on the signage up on the hill. The significance of this is as follows. The French counterattack in August 1917 basically then established the trench lines that the Americans used in September 1918 for their offensive. And again, most Americans don't draw that relationship or the overlap between Verdun and the Meuse-Argonne. And we're going to do one more relating to Verdun in the Meuse-Argonne. This map here shows American attacks beginning on 8th of October on the eastern side of the Meuse River. And the reason why is up along here, up in these heights of the Meuse, the Germans had artillery. The Germans and the Austrians had heavy artillery. And that was hitting all of the American forces along the western, I'll say the eastern half of the west bank of the Meuse River. Now here's the significance to Verdun again. In 1916, Ludendorff was faced with French artillery on the western side of the Meuse River, hitting the German forces on the eastern side. So he ran the attack or broadened the attack to include Mortam and Hill 304 on the west bank of the Meuse River. Flip it 2 years later in September 1918, and Pershing is getting hammered by artillery. So now he's got to do it on the other side of the Meuse. Again, something that if you're not well versed in history, you may not know. These are just a few history basics, a few books and things with a focus on the A.E.F. in World War I. You know, for other battlefields, there would be different books and stuff, but you know, I just wanted to list a few things for where people who are looking to do their own tour, or at least trying to figure out where they want to go, where they would plan. And certainly any of you could email me and I can give you more help. I'm not going to stay on this too long. But now some understanding the local region, some practical examples. Where can you, and I'm having just seeing the, yeah, where can you find an open gas station? What lodging alternatives are available? Do you want to stay in a hotel? Do you want to stay in a nice hotel? Do you want to stay in a local French hotel? Would you rather stay in a bed and breakfast? Do they speak English at that hotel or at that bed and breakfast? What restaurant food alternatives are available? Where can you do laundry if needed, especially if you're going to stay for more than a few days? And what services can you get at a pharmacy? We'll go through a little bit of health concerns in a little bit. Understanding the local geography, region, and rebuilding. So Marcus Klauer is a German that I met in 1994 when I did my first participation with the German Remembrance Committee of the Argonne Forest, which systematically explores the tunnels in the Argonne battlefield from World War I. And he said that when you're looking at a World War I battlefield, you have to understand what happened there during the war, immediately after the war, and the next 100 plus years. And we'll do a few examples of this. Again, showing things that some people know and some people don't. So this is the church at Lucy-le-Bocage, which is just south of Belleau Wood. I tried to pick a couple of examples that people would know well. And this is a Griffin Group photo. So this is early 1919, showing the church right at the end of the war. This is a post-war photo. I don't know the date that this postcard was made. Clearly see on the right side, have added, or you'll notice there's still a good bit of damage though. Here's the wall. And if you're looking at this slope, here's the wall up here. So, you know, the war memorial would be like down here. Here, just to show you, you've got this, I'm not sure what that is, if that was a crucifix, but you've got that in both pictures. So we're going to start with that French postcard again. And here is a modern day picture from 2017 when I was leading one of my clients on the battlefield. And again, you've got the memorial to line up and you've got the wall to line up. But you'll notice that the church architecturally changed quite considerably. And it's not uncommon. So sometimes when you're trying to line things up, whether you're looking at, in some cases, villages were moved 100 or 200 meters away, just because that area was relatively less damaged in terms of toxic shells and stuff at the end of the war. So this is a great example of where you see that. Another one, most people, if you've gone to the battlefields, you've gone to the Meuse-Argonne American Memorial at Montfaucon. Here's a German dugout, again, another Griffin Group photo, showing the German dugout. And here's the dugout in 2018. And you can see right here and right over here is where the plaques would have been. Obviously, the plaques are no longer there, probably taken by souvenir hunters. The entrance there is totally filled in. Here, there's a little bit of a hint of an entrance, but it's been filled in. Why has it been filled in? I like to say Montfaucon has been sanitized, because to make it available to thousands of visitors a year, you can't have it be ruins. It's just too dangerous. If you've read Bill Walker or William Travis Walker's book or Gene Fax's book on Montfaucon, you know how heavily catacombed, I guess, or combed it was with bunkers and dugouts and all sorts of German defenses. Here's another version. This is a Signal Corps photo. And so focus here on the Y ravine, or not ravine, but on the Y intersection up here and this little curve in the road. And when you take a look at this picture, this is the photo, this is the area today. Again, you can see just how sanitized Montfaucon has become. And it became that way to make it visible or to make it a viable place for tourists to visit. And you can imagine all of that rubble had to go places. And this road right now is kind of a sunken road, and that's largely, my thought is they just literally bulldoze most of that in the rubble and just put dirt over it. I can't confirm that because I haven't been not allowed to dig it up, but it just seems like that's the case. One of the things that's been hitting the French is hitting the Lorraine area in particular and other regions of France. We've had it out on the West Coast too, is the bark beetle infestation. And that is directly in part the result of World War I, because in the 1920s and 30s, the Zone Rouge, the really heavily infested areas of the zone, the really heavily infested, or not infested, sorry, the really heavily poisoned areas with regards to poison gas and all of the artillery and chemicals in the ground. The French set up the National Forest Office and authorized them to build forests in those areas. And they did that largely with soft woods. And these are the woods now where the bark beetle, given the global warming and the lack of rain and hot summers, these are the areas that are just being ravaged by bark beetles. So now what the French are doing is they're coming in and actually taking down large sections of forest, and they hope to replant them with trees that will be a little bit more resistant to the bark beetle. But a lot of the soft trees have done a lot of damage. Here's another picture showing the effects of the bark beetle. And both of those pictures, by the way, were taken by Christina Holstein last year for an article that I was doing. So we're going to switch from understanding the local region to kind of understanding the culture a bit. The book on the left, it's a little dated, but it was the first one I've picked up, and it's my favorite. It's still my favorite. It's Savoir-Faire, 211 Tips for Enjoying France and the French. And basically gives you an idea of what to expect. And what I often do, not so much anymore, but when I was first starting to travel to France, I would typically do a quick browse through that for an hour and a half, sometime before my trip. And it just made such a difference in terms of my enjoyment of the tour. And I'll tell you, listening to Americans talk at Charles de Gaulle Airport, they either had a wonderful tour or they had a terrible tour. And the Americans that had a terrible tour are typically the ones that don't understand any cultural differences and expected everything to be the same way it was in the United States. And if you're going in with that expectation, you're going to have a real hard time. In France, in any country, but in France, I think more so to a degree than others. Mike Kunwa has his Battles of the First World War podcast. And what was really fun is Carol Kiefer, who lived in New Jersey, and she was a French cross-cultural trainer for businesses. She and I and Mike did one of his podcasts called Insert Laugh Track Here, a cross-cultural conversation on visiting France. And we talked about some of these differences. It's an hour long. You can find it quite easily on the internet. It's the first Battles of the First World War podcast, and the title is Insert Laugh Track Here. I have two websites, and one is called museargon.com, and I have cultural topics in the blog there. So these are just a few of the topics that I cover. What does not work in France, what works in France, French roundabouts, the beloved brocante, finding suitable places for ladies to pee in the French countryside. That's difficult. Again, in part because stores don't have to offer any restrooms, and cheap gas, Sundays, and other creative solutions. So one or two French language tips. And this is from Savoir-Faire, the five expressions of politeness. Bonjour, monsieur, bonjour, madame. Merci, s'il vous plaît, excusez-moi, and au revoir when you leave the restaurant or when you leave a store. If you do that and just make some effort, they are amazingly helpful. If you if you barge into a store or a restaurant just speaking English and not making any effort at all, not even saying hello, you're probably going to get a much colder reaction and much less help. So one of the things that I do because I get out into the battlefields and look at when to explore walking on people's property. So I always prepare a few written sentences of introduction and basically explain who I am, my interest in the war. I have if I have a friend who speaks French well, I'll have them write it, or you can do it with Google Translate. Now I can speak French a little bit better. Before I did my 2017, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Before I went over for 8 months in 2017, 2018, I took a year and a half of private French lessons. So I don't have to worry about this as much. But if you don't speak much French, this is one way that if someone comes up and challenges you or questions what you're doing, you can show them. And I've never had any problem when I've done that. So how can you pick up on the language? You can take a course at the local adult school. You can take an online course. There's French videos on YouTube. You can join a French speaking group if available. Practice, just find some ways to practice it. And you don't need to get fluent, but the more proficient you are, the more comfortable you'll be traveling. So, it just makes your trip a little bit more easy. A few travel basics. And this goes back to some of the cultural topics that we talked about in that quiz at the beginning. Almost all of France shuts down except for restaurants and bars from 12 to 2. It's almost impossible to get lunch after 2:30. And I put except McDo. McDonald's is the one place that is open. Otherwise, typically the French restaurants shut down and then they reopen again at say 6 p.m. Almost everything is shut on Sunday, except for the Oasis on the autoroutes. Many museums and small businesses are closed Monday too, so you've got to watch it when you're scheduling things. And French store hours are much more limited than in the US. And go to the patisserie boulangerie in the morning because they will typically close at 2 or 3 in the afternoon. So you've got to get your bread in the morning. Sometimes they'll offer a prefix or a formule sandwich, which gives you a sandwich, a dessert, and a drink. And you can take that in your car to have a nice meal on the battlefield, or a box lunch, I guess you'd say, on the battlefield. And dinner typically is 2+ hours, and it typically starts around 8 p.m. You might be able to get in at 7:30, but typically the French don't start eating earlier than that. So I'll just go back for a second. There's, in terms of where you're going to stay for lodging, you've got a hotel, a gite, or a chambre d'hôte. Rural France generally has a much more limited assortment of hotels, but they have a large number of rental cottages and bed and breakfasts. So a gite is a rental cottage, and you can rent it for a weekend or typically at least a couple days. Chambre d'hôte is a bed and breakfast, and they typically are 4 or 5 rooms or less in France. And you can find these on Airbnb.com or gitedefrance.com. And you can search on Gite de France, you can search for the region that you're looking at, and how far, you can specify exactly what search range you want. So a few more travel basics on driving. The autoroutes in France are wonderful smooth surfaces, and there are no tire retreads. The Europeans generally don't allow tire retreads, or their trucks are not as heavy as the US, so you do not have highways littered with retreads once the temperature gets up to 80 degrees or higher. And they've got rest areas situated every 20 to 30 kilometers, so about every 20 miles. The rest areas are open on Sundays, and that's a source of gas and a source of food when nothing else is open on Sunday. The downside is that there are some toll sections that's expensive. Gas is twice the US price. I haven't asked my friends today what gas is situated at, but it's still very expensive. And the cheapest place to buy gas is often a hypermarket. Think of a Cora or a Leclerc sitting outside the major cities. And away from the autoroutes, not all gas pumps will accept American credit cards. So don't let your tank run empty, and have a plan B. My plan B typically in that, by the way, typically in that is I'll wait for someone else to pull up behind me, and then I'll explain that it's not taking my credit card, and can I pay them and let them use their card? And usually they will do that, especially if they see that you're a tourist that doesn't speak the language that fluently. Driving basics, lane discipline is a must. Americans stink at it, and we will get in the left-hand lane and go whatever. In Europe, you keep right except for passing, and you can get a ticket for improper lane usage. Speed is camera controlled, so it's no, you don't have that 10 miles over. You have a few kilometers and that's it. And if a gendarme catches you speeding, you have to pay the fine immediately in cash or with a credit card. There's no going to the court date, no disputing it. They've got you on record. You've been speeding and that's it. Distracted driving is illegal and can come with heavy fines. You're not supposed to be eating or drinking while you're driving. And toll booths have lanes for cash, credit cards, and telepayage, which is their version of Easy Pass. You just have to make sure you get into the correct lane for cash or credit cards. In almost all cases, vehicles and roundabouts have priority. So switching topics again, in this presentation, we're going to talk about we're going to talk a little about a lot of topics. So with the COVID era travel, basically the EU wants you to be fully vaccinated, and that has been defined as the initial vaccinations and one booster 9 months after the last initial vaccination. And it's also not considered fully vaccinated until 2 weeks after that third shot. But each country sets their own guidelines. So the easiest thing to do is know which countries you're going to go to and Google the country name and COVID-19 traveling and keep monitoring the websites before and during your travel. So for France, and I verified this morning, the US is a green country in terms of the spread of COVID. Fully vaccinated travelers do not need a negative test to enter France. Unvaccinated travelers still need to present a negative test to enter France, but they don't have to quarantine and they don't need any additional tests once they're in France. Not that long ago, I think it was in mid-March, they started relaxing the vaccine pass. So now the only place where you really need a vaccine certificate is in healthcare establishments like nursing homes or places where, like hospitals, where there's establishments are for vulnerable and disabled people. But this could change if a new variant comes out and pressures the healthcare system. So the best thing to do is just to stay chart, and this is New York Times data that I've been tracking over the last year and a half or so. And this is the population with initial shots and one booster from January 2022, beginning of January to now 1st of June. And you can see various 5 European countries, and you can see the United States. The big thing is that the United States, we only have a little bit more than 30% of the population with 2 shots and a booster, where the Europeans are at least up in the high 50s, low 60% range. So at the time I wrote this was the requirement, but we're going to put a big X there because beginning 12:01 a.m. tomorrow, you don't need to the CDC doesn't require you to take a COVID-19 test before you get on a plane to come back to the United States. But they did say that they would review this in 90 days and they reserve the right to reinstate the requirement if that situation changes. So effective tomorrow morning, you don't need to take that test anymore, which, some people just didn't want to travel internationally because they were afraid, well, what happens if I test positive and can't get on the plane? Switching to other areas of healthcare, and Sal, this is where I'm calling you a friend. A friend who has operated tours suggested that clients with chronic diseases make sure they bring adequate supplies of all medications with them and make a list of all medications and dosing times and bring along their doctor information.
Yes, I fully agree with that. I fully agree. I've had 2 experiences where that happened, and you need to have them completely prepared for a trip and be prepared for something like that, because accidents can happen. And you can have people having reactions to certain things where they are. All right.
So there, I listened to you, Sal. Another thing is if you're feeling sick, try going to the local pharmacy first. Pharmacists can typically, besides filling prescriptions, they can also give you the drug. Sorry, they don't just fill prescriptions, they can also give you the drug. So in a sense, they're a bit like doctors, and that can save you They will, but in France, a lot of times they will try homeopathic medicine or medicine that's a little less, what's the right word, less harsh overall. Whoops. But still, you can save a lot of time versus trying to find a doctor's appointment, trying to make an appointment with a local doctor or going to a hospital. And I had to put this in. This was from a World Health Organization 2000 rankings. France is the best healthcare in the world. I had, and I'll just give one example, in 2005, I was taking members of my reenacting regiment over on a tour, and one of the reenactor's spouses, she was developing a urinary tract infection, and it was getting worse as we were going. So we skipped a lot of what we were going to do that day and took her down to the hotel and thought, well, we'll get her to rest. And in the back of my mind, I was thinking, oh boy, we're going to have to drive into Verdun. We're going to be spending 6 or 8 hours in the hospital, huge bill, and we're not going to be able to understand anything. In reality, that was the fear. The reality was that the people, the owners of the hotel, and I've been staying there since '97, so they knew me, but they called the local doctor who came out on a Friday night, made a house visit, and I think he charged 30 euros. Then he wrote her 2 prescriptions, and they called the pharmacy in the region that was on duty for Friday night, because in France, every region has to have one pharmacy that is open for emergencies. And we were able to drive down and get those drugs. And by the next day, she was already starting to feel better. And all for a 30 euro visit, doctor visit. And I don't know what, a handful of, maybe another 30 euros or 50 euros for the pharmaceuticals. And that was it. Way cheaper and much easier than I thought it would have been had that occurred in the United States. So we're going to switch topics again. Why visit the battlefields? This is one of the things that Sal, when he and I were talking about, when I volunteered to do this, so, well, kind of talk a little bit about why people visit battlefields and what the importance of visiting battlefields is. So this is the earliest guidebook that I've got in my collection, and it's 1920. So it's literally less than 2 years after the end of the war. And you can see a quote here from the remains of Company D. People at that time were looking for closure, and we don't understand that today. Maybe you do if you had a veteran that died somewhere else. And of course, nowadays, most of the American veterans if they're killed, they get brought back relatively quickly. But that certainly wasn't the case in World War I. So, there were families looking for closure and trying to see where their relative, where their loved one died, and where that happened. So already just a few months after the end of the war, they were going over. Family pilgrimages. Valerie Young, I use often as my poster child. And here's an article by her. She's actually written 3, I think, articles on my musargon.com website. But she contacted me in 2016. After her maternal grandmother died, she found stuff about her maternal grandfather, who was in the 79th Division in the fighting at Montfaucon. And she wanted to go see it. So I couldn't take her in 2016, but my German friend Marcus Klauer took her. Then she came over again in 2017. And then she came over again and did the combined tour with us in 2018. The point being that she really got into it and really got the bug by finding the family connection. And I would say in 2017 and 2018, I quit my day job and I spent 8 months in France as a freelance battlefield guide. And I would say that most of the clients that hired me for private tours in that time all had relatives that fought there, and they wanted to try to retrace the steps. I found this interesting. I still think, Kaufman's book is great, The War to End All Wars, but I was surprised that he hadn't visited the battlefields when he was writing his book in the 1960s. Of course, it was a little bit more challenging to visit the battlefields then, but here's a quote from his book that he hadn't actually visited the battlefield until 1990. Now, Ed Lingell, To Conquer Hell, on the other hand, specifically says that, he did it when he was writing to better understand the local ground. And James Carl Nelson, who wrote The Remains of Company D, did the same when he was writing his book. So, visiting the battlefields does definitely help you understand the war a little bit more and feel, you get a little bit stronger feel than just reading a history book or just reading a divisional history. Then there are people that look at the way, this is more of a professorial or a university look, but look at the way people and countries do remembrance. And this is just one example of books like this that John Snow turned me on to. But you can see the chapter titles on the 9 chapter titles, and it talks about basically how the battlefield has changed from the beginning, and pluses and negatives, and how that has occurred over the last 100 years. Now, he focuses largely on the British because it's Ypres and Flanders Field and the Somme that gets the huge numbers of battlefield visitors. I mean, relatively few Americans hit there. And this is my favorite quote, and I'll just leave this and let you read through it. But this is, I've always said, battlefields speak to me. And I wasn't quite well versed at putting it into, why they speak to me. But I think this is, I think this major hit it right on the head. And I've got just a couple of odds and ends. One thing to think about when you're doing tours too is the impact of mechanization. The inverted fishhook that was the Union lines at Gettysburg was about 5 to 6 miles, a front of 5 to 6 miles wide. The Meuse-Argonne on 26th of September was a front that was 20 miles wide. The Ardennes assault, what we call the Battle of the Bulge on the 16th of December, when Hitler started that, it was more than 60 miles wide. So the point is, when you're planning a tour, especially if you're looking at the World War II sites, you're dealing with a much more mobile army, and you have to plan to travel much greater distances and be much more selective about the things that you're going to visit, because there's no way you can do it all. But even if you're looking at the Meuse-Argonne, let's say, I mean, it all depends on what level of intensity you want to look at. I've taken a German regiment from the unit that I used to portray, and you could take a single regiment and you could spend months just looking at their areas. So it all depends on how intense you want to do this, but you have to keep that in mind when you're planning. Sal and I were also mentioning the proximity of the World War I and the World War II battlefields. I took these 2 photos out of I forget the group that published it, Veterans of Foreign Wars or something like that. It was a 4-album or 5-volume set. And they literally went through World War II day by day. But you can see here that they've got Verdun Falls to Patton's Men. And if you've been in Verdun, you're familiar with that sculpture. And you've got the Hill 204, the Chateau Thierry American Memorial. And so it's, people kind of forget just how entwined those are. And actually later this year, for either late in the fall or early in 2023, my German partner, Marcus Klauer, and I are going to actually do one presentation on the ties between World War I and World War II in terms of units and in terms of key leaders. So anyways, you've heard me talk for a long time. I was a high yield bond analyst, but was also a reenactor, historian, and battlefield tourist for quite a few decades. My first battlefield tour was 1986, and I began museargonne.com website in 2014. And then in France, as I mentioned, I did 8 months in 2017, 2018 as a freelance guide to the A.E.F. battlefields of World War I. I did a little bit of World War II at that time. And in 2020, I started a tour company called Knee Deep into History. In total, I've lived in Western Europe for 2 years. I'm fluent in German, somewhat proficient in French. And Knee Deep into History, the tour philosophy, and this built out of the 8 months I was in Europe. I was in France in 17 and 18, getting the clients into the field as much as possible, guiding small group tours to ensure greater interaction with guides, attempting to present a balanced view of both sides of the situation. And there my German language comes in helpful, and working with Marcus Klauer, designing a tour for those seriously interested in history and introducing clients to local, not American culture. We try not to go to McDonald's. I had to go to McDo one time because it was a Sunday, and I had one of my clients was diabetic and needed to get some food, and nothing else was open. So I said, well, don't tell anyone else that I took you to a McDo, but that's the only time I've taken my clients to one. And then this is just our flyer. And again, you can reach me at, I'll go back to the previous page. kneedeepintohistory.com is the website, and kneedeepintohistory@gmail.com is the email. But I'll take any questions or comments that you want to do at this point. Melanie, do you want me to stop my screen sharing, or should I keep the screen up just in case people want to refer back to the slides?
We can keep it up for a few more. Oh, sorry, Randy, I hear an echo. Sorry. We can keep it up for a few more minutes to let people get the info down. So I'll just I only have a little. Let me just change my view here, Randy, so I can see the. Oops, I did the wrong thing. Sorry. Just expanding my view so I can see if we have any hands.
Yeah, if anyone has any questions or comments that they want to make, or experiences that they've had culturally or local region.
Okay, there we go. Yeah, please. I know several of you still have your video off, so if you do want to ask a question, just unmute yourself and.
Yes, I've got a question. My family were Canadians in the Great War.
Uh-huh.
Have you ever done groups with the Canadian battlefields? In particular, my great uncles were 1st Division Canadian Expeditionary Force.
I haven't led battlefield tours with that, but Scott, I've been to Vimy Ridge and along the Somme. And Marcus Klauer, the German that I work with, he has led Flanders Field and the Somme battlefield tours. So he definitely does.
Oh.
If you want to get back to us, and we're offering one jointly. Last year we offered one, we just didn't have, because of COVID, we didn't have the interest level. But if you want to get back to us, we can definitely do that. Because Marcus knows that region much better than I do.
Yeah, Randy, I have a question for you. If you were going to have another tour, say, in the fall this year,
right?
What ballpark price would you offer for it? Just the tour, not flight or anything else.
Yeah.
What would you say would be a sort of a ballpark price for it?
About $2,000.
For how long?
For that's basically we call it a 5-day plus 2. Call it 7 days, 6 nights.
Okay. All right.
But here's the thing, when you're looking at tours, we are almost everything inclusive. If you look at some of the tours, so the way we generally price is we come out to about $325, $350 a night. Like I say, 7 days, 6 nights. So I would call that a 6.5 night trip. Because the 2 days on both ends, you're meeting, they're not full days. But so it's a 6.5. And if you look at other tour groups, and if you do it the same calculation, that's probably where it depends on what you want. Like the New York Times does a tour where it's over $500 a day. The British tours, the ones coming out of the UK, typically are lower. They're at $250 maybe $dollars a day. But you have to be wary of how many meals are left out so that you're on your own for meals.
Yeah.
If you're looking for tours, I would say make sure you're comparing apples to apples. Because some tours, for instance, have, half of the dinners and half of the lunches you're on your own, and that's not included in their pricing. Where we are, the only thing we don't cover is we'll do wine at the dinner, but any other drinks are on you and any, souvenirs that you buy. So it really is, just make sure you're comparing apples to apples.
Yeah, very wise, very wise. Yeah.
Sal, when you did your tours, how did you do it?
Well, I did like, as you expressed it, I did not include all meals. But the hotels, every hotel always included breakfast, so you didn't even have to mention
Right.
breakfast.
Yep.
But we skipped a couple of lunches and on the 3 of the tours I had. And it was requested. A number of people like it.
Okay.
I had more trouble, and I would suggest this, is that when you have a tour like this and you stay at certain hotels, that every person who stays at that hotel get a card about that hotel, carry it with them. If they get lost, they can always tell the taxi driver or whoever it is that they're seeking help from by having that card in
Okay.
where you are. I would recommend that as a priority because of the 4 or 5 tours I've run, invariably one guy got lost. And
Okay.
that always drives you crazy.
And what level hotels would you stay at when you were organizing your tours?
It was 2 to 3 star hotels we stayed at.
Okay. Yeah, we typically will try to stay in 3-star hotels that are family oriented,
Right.
family owned, not chains, with a nice restaurant.
I'd also suggest that you don't go beyond 15 members in your tour.
We try to limit it to 18 because and so far with COVID, we haven't had that. We haven't had anywhere near that luck. Hopefully that will change, but we really, especially having 2 guides, it really gives us a good chance to talk and to answer a lot more questions, and you get a lot more interaction the smaller the group. I agree. Any other questions or comments?
Randy, my name's Matt Savage. I'm newer to this group. I'm a graduate student at the Citadel, and my wife and I are going to be passing through France, possibly very end of September, very early October. She is not a history fan, but I think I'm able to squeeze a few days out of her to be able to travel in the Meuse-Argonne area.
Okay.
Is there any, if you only had a day or two, what would be the top place you would recommend for an American tourist interested in the A.E.F?
Do you know, are you familiar with American Armies and Battlefields in Europe? The book?
The book?
Yes.
Or yes, I'm actually combing through it now for a class.
Okay, that's a great starting place. And do you have any family connections to World War I or just?
Yeah.
Okay, because if you did, I would say focus on those areas where that happened. But you obviously you have to hit the Montfaucon Meuse-Argonne American Memorial, and you have to hit the Meuse-Argonne American Cemetery at Romagna sous Montfaucon. I would visit Jean-Paul de Vries's museum in Romagna.
Yes.
Romagna 14 to 18. I really like getting out into the battlefields, and if you contact me, I can give you a few ideas on places. One of my favorites, and most Americans don't go there. There's a plateau in the Argonne called Le Chêne Tendu. It's just southwest of Apremont. And all the Americans know is they turn on the road. I forget the road number now. But they drive past the Deutsche Soldatenfriedhof Apremont, and they see the German cemetery. What they don't see is on that side of the road behind the German cemetery, that's where the 28th Division, the Yankee Division, or not the Yankee Division, the Bloody Bucket, the 28th Division fought the Germans trying to take that ridge. You can actually go take a walk back there and you can see trench lines, and not trench lines, you can see machine gun bunkers and foxholes all along there. There's a 100-plus-year-old tree that still has insulators in it. And there's a German signals, a concrete bunker for signals for communications there. And then on the other side of the road, there's the remains of a German camp. And most Americans drive right past it because they're driving down to the Lost Battalion pocket, and they don't see it. So that's the kind of thing. That's the kind of thing. That's why my company, I call it Knee Deep into History. I really like getting people out into the battlefields and away from just going to the markers and the monuments. You can check with me too. Email me, because I might have a day or two of private touring there too, available at that time.
Perfect. I appreciate it.
Yep. Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, Randy,
Yes.
this is Jackie Lucier.
Hi.
Hi. My grandfather fought for the French army in World War I,
Yeah.
and I was just wondering, are there any tours in English about where the French army fought? He was in Champagne and Verdun.
Okay. The best person to talk to would be Marcus Clower.
Okay.
The guy that I do the tours with. Email me again, kneedeepintohistory@gmail.com.
Okay.
And Marcus, he's German, he's a retired Bundeswehr officer, but he speaks German, English, and French fluently. He lives in Lille, France. And he's written 5 books on the battlefields of World War I.
Okay.
So he would certainly be able to help you get through that, especially in the Verdun area. Two of the books he's written have been on Verdun.
Oh, okay. Thanks very much, Randy.
Sure.
Randy, I'd like to say something. At
Mhm.
some point on every one of our tours, we had 2 or 3 nights in Paris. And I would urge everyone on every one of the tours to go to Les Invalides not Les Invalides, but to the military museum in Paris and it's really worth the day's trip. So it includes the history, of course, of France's military history, but there's a large section on World War I and World War II there. And it really excites a lot of people when they take a tour of that place. And you don't even have to have a guide. They just go on their own. It's well worth the experience. And I would recommend it.
Interesting, because that's a good tip. We don't spend any time in Paris. But the expectation is that a lot of our clients, a lot of the Americans coming over will do other things either before or after their trip that before or after the tour, I mean.
Right.
Anything else?
Thank you, Randy. That was very enlightening.
Oh, you're welcome. Ted, do you have your hand up?
I do, Randy. Can you hear me all right?
Yep.
You might mention the museum at Meaux.
Yes. I'm trying to remember the official name of it now, but actually I'll mention it and then I'll make a change on that, or I'll make a comment on it. In Meaux, just along the Marne River, not that far outside of Paris, is a French World War I museum. And yes. I've been there, and I've also in Verdun, there is the Memorial at Verdun. And in my opinion, the museum at Meaux has a lot of artifacts, and they place a lot of artifacts, but they don't do a great job of explaining the artifacts or explaining the relationships or the chronology of World War I, and it's hard to do if you're trying to do the entire war and all aspects of it. But if you take a look at the Memorial at Verdun, when they reopened that in 2016, they have a large amount of interactive graphics and interactive displays, and they have everything in French, English, and German. And actually the translations are really very good. So in my mind, the Memorial Museum is much better. The one at Meaux has a lot of good artifacts, a lot of neat artifacts, but it doesn't put things in perspective. It doesn't state the historical significance. Maybe you think differently.
No, I would agree. I would tell you though, when you walk in the very beginning of it, it drops you right into 1870, the Franco-Prussian War, to set up the stage. However, it mired me down. It was like stepping into mud. It's like, okay, I got to read all this when there's, like you say, just a ton of outstanding artifacts there.
Yeah. They have a lot of very unique artifacts, especially like some of the Navy and some of the aviation items, things that you won't see elsewhere. I just feel that they're a little bit weak in their in describing the importance of it.
Yeah.
I have a quick question. Is the museum at Mo, is that a new museum relatively?
No, not that old, not that young.
1990s, maybe?
1990s, yeah. So it's going on 30 years now.
And we're
Yeah.
talking about Mo spelled M-E-A-U-X, right?
Correct.
That's right.
Yeah,
Good. Okay.
yeah, yeah. I think it was done in the 90s.
You mentioned I think is it a private museum in the Chemin des Dames or something where this fellow has also a pretty amazing museum? Or is it in the Champagne?
Jean in Romagna sous Montfaucon in the
Oh.
Meuse Argonne. That's Jean-Paul de Vries, and it's called Romagna 14, ROMAGNE 14 to 18. It's a huge collection of rusty bits. He's a Dutchman, and he's been collecting rusty bits from the area, and it's interesting because the museum, trying to think the best way to describe it, but for instance, he has mess kits, and he might have 50 mess kits up along a wall, so it really helps you to see the enormity of the battles in that area. And when you go through it and you see just how much rusty bits he's pulled out of the ground in the last 20 years, it's just amazing. But it's really a unique collection, a unique way to see World War I in that sense.
Yeah.
But he'll just type in Romagna 14 to 18 and you'll find it easily. Anyone else?
Well, Randy, you did a great job. I really appreciate you doing this. I'm glad I chose you to speak about this. Now, are you planning another tour very soon or what?
So yeah, our schedule, let's see if I can go back up. Sorry, I'm gonna go back down. So this is our schedule on the right, you can see for fall. I don't think the first 3 tours are gonna run, but give me just 1 second here. But we're gonna run the Meuse Argonne, the Verdun, and the Flanders Field and the Somme tours. And then I've got some private tour availability after that.
Very good.
I just got a note, by the way, from Melanie Blake that she's lost connection with the meeting. She said this has never happened before. There's some kind of network outage. She's trying to get back on, but she might not be able to get back in. So
Anyway,
I was wondering if she was going to chime in. So I think, Sal, it's up to you and I to close this out if there's no further questions.
well, let's open up to everybody else. Does anybody have a question, please? Let's have it now. Well, if not, then I'm afraid we can say this is the end of this one. And remember, I'm holding off on July and probably August for a meeting on this issue. But in the meantime, I'm searching for a lot of speakers. So if you want, I can't put in my email, but it's you can call me at 510-570-7668. I thought I said it slow enough for everybody to know, but that's probably another way, but I could give you my email, but I wish I could put it on the screen. All right.
I think Melanie did put it on earlier.
Yeah, but she
If you
didn't
go
put
to
it
the
on
chat.
long enough, but anyway, we'll see what happens with this. But anyway, you can always call me again, 510-570-7668. And you have Randy's number as well. and he can give you my number and email as well.
Yeah.
All right. All right. Well, thank you all for coming, and thank you for having been here. And this is an example of why I find these interesting and most revealing parts of history that's still influencing our current day to this present day. So thank you all again. Have a
Thank
good
you.
weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Randy.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
And Sal.
Okay.
Great.
And
Thanks.
thank you all. Take
Okay.
care.
Bye-bye.